we've actually touched on some of this from some of the discussions and the reports, but let me bring up to you the cosmological argument. I want you to know what this argument is by name. Cosmological. What word does that come from?
Cosmos.
Cosmos. Which is what? Word for
Universe.
world. Greek word for world or universe. So, yeah, so we're going to talk about how do you explain the world? How do you explain the existence of the world? You know, for example, okay, let me give an example here, but this is my statement here. Everything has to have an adequate explanation. Would you agree? Everything has to have an adequate explanation. So let's say that you came in here, beginning of class, you walked in here, and then you see this big gorilla sitting on the front row eating a bowl of cornflakes. And his name isn't Andrew. So what would you think?
Wrong class.
Wrong class.
Security must not be on duty.
They'll let JJ out of the dorm, I guess.
GBS finally accepted evolution. Now we're trying to train our hands.
This is the news. You know, our recruiting efforts are getting a little bit extreme. We're a little desperate here. But see, I mean, you're searching for an explanation, right? Because everything has to have an explanation. So you think, well, you know, was there a zoo? Of course, there's a Cincinnati Zoo. The gorilla escape. What's that?
Where did you get
cornflakes?
Well, yeah. Why would we eat cornflakes? You know, where did that bowl of cornflakes come from? How in the world can he hold that in his hands? Yeah, I mean, you would demand an explanation. Your mind, it can't function without understanding, you know, why things are the way they are. Well, everything has to have an adequate explanation, including the universe itself. How did the universe get here? Why is it here? You know, here's the argument here. The universe could not have come from nothing. It could not have always existed just as it is. It could not have come from impersonal matter / energy. Okay? Therefore, there must have been a personal beginning to it. Okay, so let's go through this one by one and ask these questions. Why couldn't the universe come from nothing?
Would this be based the first and second laws of thermodynamics?
Well, we're not quite there yet. But yeah, well, I guess the first law, matter can be neither created nor destroyed. So things just don't pop into existence from nothing. But what's wrong with, well, we just came from nothing.
You can't have something without nothing.
You can't have something without nothing? Nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever.
We know that the universe...
Isn't that the sound of music? What's that?
We know the universe is moving. So something had to start it. We can't... one of the laws of energy is that not energy, matter, is that you have to have something to start something moving.
Okay.
And once something's moving, it keeps on moving unless it stops. So something had to start it.
Okay.
So the universe had to have something to start it moving.
Okay, so you need an unmoved mover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You know, if okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna kind of just for the sake of argument. We say nothing can come from nothing, but in your little diagram of the little bubble about how much we know, how much is out there, what's saying that we haven't discovered that nothing can come from nothing? What if that is outside our range of thinking, and that really nothing can come from nothing? We just haven't discovered how or why yet.
Well, I guess you could use that argument against anything, right? But see, all the evidence goes against it. All the logical evidence, all the empirical evidence goes against the idea. Well, but you go on the basis of the evidence, right? We have that knowledge.
The burden of proof lies with you.
Lucy?
I think he contradicted himself because he said discovered. Just because it's out there doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means you haven't discovered it yet. So, like, I mean, I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. Like, stuff can be out there, but just because we don't know about it, because our minds are finite, doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Of course, he's trying to twist that around and say that maybe the evidence that nothing can come from nothing is out there and we just don't know it yet. You know?
How could you discover that? It's nothing.
Brandon?
Isn't that more properly called an unfalsifiable claim, such as, I know in resurrection there's a bunch of theories about what happened to the body of Jesus, and one is that an alien came and abducted him, but the problem is they claim this is what happened, but it's unfalsifiable. There's no evidence for, there's no evidence against, so it's kind of sitting up there.
Yeah.
So I think to make a claim that's so drastic, there's no evidence for it, and there's no evidence against it. So in a sense, it doesn't.
Well,
really
there's all
count.
kinds of evidence against the idea that nothing comes from nothing. I mean, it's actually ludicrous. It's self-contradictory. You know, something would have to exist before it existed in order to create itself, right? You know, I mean, how do you get something from nothing? I actually heard a debate in which this guy is trying to argue, though, that the universe did come from nothing. It's pretty laughable. Anyway, we got some hands here.
I just want to clarify.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't mean that there's no evidence against it. I only meant there's no evidence for it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Can we move on? I mean, let me just. Yeah. This will come back up because I think I'm going to try to find that debate that I found that in. I think I showed that in another class. I'll pull it up again. Why couldn't the universe have always existed? Well, we have the problem of the laws of thermodynamics, which has already been discussed. The first law says what? Matter can be neither created nor destroyed. So no new energy, no new matter is being pumped into the universe. Of course, we believe that it was made by God originally. It was created originally. But no new matter is being pumped into the universe. There's no evidence for that at all. The evidence is actually, for the fact that there's no new matter being created. And then the second law says what? Yeah, that's kind of the principle that kind of comes, maybe more a general principle, but as far as energy goes, specifically related to energy.
If there's no energy coming in, that means that the original energy kind of deteriorated to something.
Okay, yeah. What's happening is that usable energy in the universe is slowly becoming unusable. And it's called the Law of Entropy. And so eventually, over time, what's going to happen? If there's no new energy, but usable energy is being transferred to unusable, yeah, we're going to run out of fuel. We no longer have any usable energy in the universe, so there would be a death. Everything would be cold and lifeless. So if the universe has always existed, then how could we even be here now? How could we be alive and conversing with one another if the laws of thermodynamics have always been in effect? See? So right there, just based on the evidence that we have right now about the laws of the universe, one of the questions I like to bring up to where did the laws of the universe come from? They can't explain that. They can't. Okay. Why couldn't the universe come from impersonal matter / energy? maybe there was this big blob, this speck or whatever. This is kind of what they believe, that there's this almost infinitely dense particle that exploded somehow. Okay, so you have this blob of matter / energy plus time plus chance. You begin with this. You throw in some random chance, you throw in time, and we have what we have today. I love what C.S. Lewis said. Not C.S. Lewis, Francis Schaeffer said. He said, beginning with the impersonal, everything, including man, must be explained in terms of the impersonal plus time plus chance. Do not let anyone divert your mind at this point. There are no other factors in the formula because there are no other factors that exist. No one has ever demonstrated how time plus chance, beginning with the impersonal, can produce the needed complexity of the universe, let alone the personality of man. So let's go back to this diagram here. To me, this seems like their Trinity. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. This is God to them. Time is everything. Time is so, give enough time, we have enough time, then, anything can happen. Time can do miracles. Chance. And then this blob. There's the atheistic Trinity. That's all I need. Somehow this looks ridiculous. Doesn't that to you? I mean, to think that all that we have today and our ability to communicate and even discuss this with each other somehow came as a result of, something that started, some impersonal blob of matter, energy, throwing some time, throwing some chance. We have what we have today. You think that's an adequate explanation? How ludicrous. And yet more and more people are becoming atheists. It's incredible. It's part of the, great apostasy or whatever. People are just brainwashed. I mean, I talk to these people. They're normal people, great friends, very, kind people. Yet they believe this. It's hard to believe it. Yeah, so, if we're going to reject these other options, then the universe must have been created by a personal, eternal being, because that is the only adequate explanation for what we have today. Someone who could bring this into existence, some all-powerful, thinking being who knew enough to bring everything that we have into existence. Okay. Now, related to that is the teleological argument, which in my mind is part of the cosmological argument. Teleological. Does anybody know what words that comes from?
It's from design.
Okay, telos means end or goal, has to do with purpose. So you could say then that all the intricate design in the universe argues for a purposeful first cause. So you take things like the eye. I mean, this is just a basic diagram, but if you really got into all the details of both the eye, how the eye is constructed, and then its functionality, wow. I mean, think about what you can do with your eyes. I mean, you can see all the detail that you can see. Isn't that incredible? And this came just from a chance? Natural selection, mutations, how the design of the eye points to a designer. When you look at the cell and all of the things in the cell that has to be functioning simultaneously in order for that cell to function at all. I mean, incredibly designed, very, very detailed. And how could that come from chance? Then you got DNA. I mean, this is incredible. Okay, I have a fact here. All the information of the human body is stored in a strand of human DNA that takes up less space than the period at the end of a written sentence. Okay, think about the page, the period on your page there. All of the information of the human body is stored in a strand of human DNA that takes up less space than the period at the end of a written sentence. The amount of information that could be stored in a pinhead's volume of DNA, a pinhead. Now, if I showed a pin to you, you probably couldn't even see the head from where you were sitting. Or, it's so small. It's bigger than a dot that I put on that blackboard. Just a tiny little thing, tiny little spot. Yet, the amount of information that could be stored in a pinhead's volume of DNA is equivalent to a pile of paperback books 500 times as high as the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Each of those books having specific, different content. And that just happened? Just by chance? And, mutations and natural selection? Wow. All right, let me go to the anthropic principle. That's the idea. Anthropic has to do with man, anthropos. And so what this argument is that the Earth has just the right conditions for human life. So for example, the distance from the sun from the Earth from the sun, we had to be right where we are or we couldn't survive. How about gravity and magnetism, electromagnetism? This is getting into some physics here from Patrick Glynn. He says, gravity is roughly 10 to the 39th times weaker than electromagnetism. If gravity had been 10 to the 33rd times weaker than electromagnetism, stars would be 1 billion times less massive and would burn 1 million times faster. And that would be a good situation. And then the protons and neutrons. Get into some chemistry here. If the difference in mass between a proton and a neutron were not exactly as it is, roughly twice the mass of an electron, then all neutrons would have become protons or vice versa. And if that happened, then there wouldn't be life. No way. And then the nature of water. Now, water's pretty fascinating, isn't it? I want you to notice something here. Here's a glass of water. Anything that's unique about this? It's ice water. What's unique about this? The solid is, lighter than the liquid form. Now, does that happen with anything else that you know of? What happens if a wooden structure gets cold? What happens? It shrinks. The boards separate more, right? Because the colder something gets, anything like that. Of course, if it has moisture in it, then it might do something different. But ice is unique in that regard, right? Now, what would happen if ice didn't float? It looks good. What would happen if it did float?
Fish would die.
Okay, in a lot of lakes, in certain climates, when it got cold and icy, what would happen? Rather than the ice being at the top of the lake, it would actually sink to the bottom. Lakes would freeze from the bottom up. And of course that would destroy the life.
And also the ice on top of the lakes insulates the water underneath, so it's still warm enough for the water life to continue.
Yeah, so it would be, I mean, you wouldn't be able to have much of a winter. There goes all your fish you like to eat.
It's kind of
Yeah.
a funny thing that happens, but the polar bears would really lose their home.
The polar bear?
If the icebergs at the poles went down to the bottom of the ocean, I mean, that'd be really, really bad. I would go crazy. but think about it. That would mess up the entire ocean cycle. If suddenly all the cold water from the poles went to the bottom of the ocean, if it's sunk,
It seems like it would really mess things up. Yeah.
it would change the
Kind of
completely.
globally. Yeah, it seems. Yeah.
But could, again, for the sake of argument, if a science person is looking at this and we're trying to say that this proves that there's a God, can't they look at this and say, if ice were to form from the bottom up, couldn't these creatures have adapted to the conditions that they can? We're only trying to see something that we know, like we see the animals how they are now, but if ice had always been forming, couldn't they have mutated to survive in colder water?
You don't think
or
they have
different
some kind
climates and
of
stuff?
explanation? They always do. You see, what the anthropic principle is an accumulation of all of these different things that point in the same direction. It's not just one thing. It's over and over and over again, all kinds of different ways that the world is situated just so we can have life. It seems. I mean, it seems like it has a purpose. And I know what they talk about even these multitude of universes. If you have enough universes out there, you have the possibility of enough worlds, and maybe you'd have another Earth just like this. I mean, surely. I mean, of course, with an infinite number of universes and worlds and planets, then of course you would expect to be in a universe, to be in a world like this. I mean, it's like they're in denial of the evidence. The evidence is all against that. The multiverse and all that. But all right, and then lastly, the moral argument. The fact that we all have a sense of right and wrong argues for a supreme lawgiver from which morality comes. And C.S. Lewis is very famous for this in his first book of Mere Christianity. He lays out the argument for that. But there's a sense of oughtness that all of us have. There may be slightly different opinions as to what is moral from different cultures, but all of us have this sense of oughtness, that we ought to do this or that. And where does this sense of oughtness come from, if not from God? And there's a really good argument that William Craig uses for the moral argument. We'll probably get into that some, but I'm just skipping, just briefly mentioning that. Okay, now, then lastly, responding to the number one objection to the existence of God. And that is the problem of evil, right? If there is a good and omnipotent God, then why is there evil and suffering in the world? The existence of evil must prove that there is not a good, omnipotent God. Now, what's our reaction to that?
Free will.
Free will, yeah. Yeah, I think this is the first response, though. But I have in the notes here. The problem of evil implies that there is a God. Now, how could that be? The very thing that you think is the greatest objection to the existence of God is actually a very good proof for the existence of God. Why?
It implies a standard.
Yeah. How do you know what evil is unless there is a standard of good? A standard of good and evil. You don't know what evil is. So where does this standard come from, if not from God? No? So it implies that there's a God. And why is there evil in the world? Because the first humans God made abused their freedom and chose to disobey God. And suffering is a consequence of moral evil. Okay, so we have this diagram here. Sin came into the world. Man sinned, right? And then there was a curse. And all of natural evil has come about in the world as a result of this. The problem with atheists is that they don't know Christian theology. We have a really, really good explanation for the existence of evil. It's perfectly consistent with our idea of God, who God is. All the natural evil comes from moral evil. Now, why would God make creatures who would sin against Him? And here's the answer. What's the answer? He wanted free creatures so because He wanted them to love Him. Right? He had to give them freedom. And what that means is that they could choose evil if He wanted them to love Him. Well then, okay, I understand that. But why is there so much evil? So much suffering in the world? Answer, because what this does, this is a partial answer. It's still puzzling, If you ever go through any pain, obviously, existentially, you'll be asking why. Why me, Lord? But one response is, why so much suffering? Because what this does is shows how serious sin is. Okay? And here's the last question. Why doesn't God do something about the problem? What's the answer to that? He already has done something, hasn't he? God the Father sent God the Son into the world to partake in our sufferings with us, identified with us, died, rose again, so that we could be forgiven for the sin that brought us into this situation to begin with, and then eventually to free us from all suffering eventually.